In our videos, we often mention how one Pokemon gets outclassed by another, and for less experienced players, this might not be the most intuitive concept. After all, can't every Pokemon bring something unique to the table? Yes, that is true. However, bringing something unique to the table is not enough to create a legitimate niche in a competitive atmosphere where multiple Pokemon are competing for similar roles. What a Pokemon brings must not just be unique, but also useful enough to make it worth using over other such Pokemon. Here's an easy example. In Generation 2, Delibird is the only Pokemon in the entire game that is immune to spikes and learns Rapid Spin. In and of itself, this is an incredible combination of traits. It is the envy of every other spinner in the game. Though OU's quadrumvirate of spinners, Cloyster, Fortress, Starmie, and Golem are great, they would all absolutely love to not be hit by the spikes they are trying to remove. It would boost their longevity greatly in the wars of attrition they regularly find themselves in. So why is Delibird not used for this advantage it has over all of them? Simple. Delibird is one of the worst Pokemon in the game, with horrible typing and stats. Side note, yes, we are fully aware of the irony of using this example, with Iron Bundle having been banned from Scarlet and Violet barely a week into the generation's existence. Anyway, Gen 2 Delibird illustrates the larger point. Yes, what it does is unique, entirely so. It cannot be replicated. However, it is so utterly useless beyond this one niche that it doesn't merit usage over other Rapid Spinners, which are genuinely great Pokemon in their own right beyond their Rapid Spin capabilities. Sure, you'd have a Rapid Spinner immune to spikes, and that would be nice, but what wouldn't be nice would be using a Pokemon so generally useless apart from that, which entirely outweighs the value of a spikes immune spinner. It's a risk versus reward evaluation that is such a crucial aspect of Pokemon in general. It's common to see newer players trying less seen Pokemon. This, of course, isn't bad. However, they quickly learn that the reason most lesser seen Pokemon are lesser seen is because they are outclassed by those Pokemon which are used regularly. This concept of being outclassed is, of course, multifaceted, meaning there is not one rule set taken as a truism to be written in stone. There are varying degrees of being outclassed. And in this video, we will be exploring these various degrees through different examples meant to illustrate various such nuances. Some examples of being outclassed are quite apparent. For instance, Ferrothorn is quite literally an evolved form of Ferroseed.
You don't say!
That is self-evident. There are also other examples that don't need much explaining, such as Dodrio being much better than Fearow. They are nearly identical, except Dodrio is much faster and stronger. Simple. However, where it begins to get murky is when similar Pokemon have a great deal of significant differences between them. Part of it is also metagame dependent. We'll start off with an example of nearly identical Pokemon. Latios and Latias in Generation 5 OU versus their various tenures in Ubers. Latios is stronger, Latias is bulkier. Latias' added bulk is not insignificant. It is why she is used at least just as much as her brother when in Generation 3 through 6 of Ubers, where they are allowed to run Soul Dew. It makes her better at withstanding Kyogre. Soul Dew isn't allowed in Gen 5 OU, but the point stands, especially as the Lati Twins' defensive capabilities are crucial for withstanding major threats like Keldeo and Thundurus Therian. So why is it that Latios is universally considered better than Latias in the concept of Gen 5 OU? Simply put, because his power is far more significant, since it allows him to blast past public enemy number 1 Tyranitar with greater ease, and is thus more useful on a game-to-game basis than Latias' extra bulk. In Ubers, however, where Kyogre reigns supreme, Latias' extra bulk becomes far more important, and the choice between the two is not so clear anymore. It often depends on the team. Latias' access to Healing Wish is also another advantage it boasts over Latios, whose counterpart move in Memento is not nearly so widely applicable and excellent. We can also look to the choice between Chansey and Blissey as similar. Yes, Chansey's Eviolite makes it far bulkier, but Blissey's leftovers allow it to heal passively without necessarily needing to take a turn to soft boil. Alternatively, it prevents it from being worn down by Sandstorm. These differences are significant. A bit of an offshoot of such an example is Gliscor versus Landorus Therian. Yes, both are ground flying types, but their play styles are so vastly different that they fit on different types of teams and thus do not truly outclass each other. Their own unique advantages and disadvantages mean their talents are better suited in certain areas, as opposed to competing with each other. In a similar vein, Gen 3 OU Charizard and Moltres do compete with each other a bit more, but they have differences. Charizard's greater speed, Dragon Claw, Beat Up, and Blaze ability versus Moltres' greater power, Bulk, Will-O-Wisp, Morning Sun, and Pressure ability are different enough to where it is generally not a matter of outclassing each other entirely. Here's another example between two similar yet not identical Pokemon. Garchomp Garchomp and Flygon. Both are dragon and ground, yet Garchomp is considered wholly superior. At first glance, this might seem obvious. It's faster and much stronger with its higher base attack and access to Swords Dance. But then you start looking closer and you see that Flygon has several traits Garchomp is envious of. Flygon has U-Turn, one of the best moves in the game, and its longevity is much better as it's immune to spikes, toxic spikes, earthquake, and even has reliable recovery in Roost. In later generations, it can clear hazards with Defog, and later even gets a move Chomp particularly craves, Dragon Dance. These are highly significant, valuable traits that comprise a good portion of Flygon's viability, and which Garchomp would absolutely love to have. Despite all these advantages, Garchomp remains an unequivocally better Pokemon because its own advantages over Flygon are more significant. It is more immediately threatening because of its incredible unique speed stat paired with gigantic attack, and its ability to make itself even more monstrously powerful with Swords Dance is particularly outstanding alongside that massive speed. This example is pertinent because it illustrates how despite Flygon having several significant unique advantages, and unlike Delibird, Flygon is a genuinely good Pokemon in its own right, Flygon is still outclassed because Garchomp is better at doing what it does, which is wielding its excellent stab combination. Even defensively, Garchomp is better than Flygon because it has another move Flygon is incredibly jealous of, Stealth Rock, as well as far superior bulk and an excellent ability in Rough Skin. We mentioned how being outclassed is multifaceted, and that is perfectly encapsulated in the case of Generation 4 Salamence versus Dragonite. Salamence is stronger and faster. Dragonite having extreme speed is not nearly enough to prevent it from being outclassed. Salamence inflicts much more damage and possesses many more opportunities to inflict that damage by virtue of its significantly higher speed. Packing Intimidate certainly helps in that regard as well. Yes, extreme speed is an amazing move, but it's not so amazing that it makes Dragonite worth using over Salamence in all instances except one. As a mixed attacker and Dragon Dancer, which are Salamence's main two sets, Dragonite was entirely outdone, yes, and thus never used. However, with E-Speed, it could do one thing Salamence couldn't, and that was be a great lead. It packed crucial priority to finish off Focus Sash leads like Azelf. This was an entirely unique role that Mence couldn't hope to replicate. It made Dragonite go from discount Salamence to its own Pokemon entirely. Now, where things really tend to be confusing is when Pokemon that are more different at first glance are compared to each other. What is more important to remember here is the similarities they have in the context of the role they are meant to play. Consider the example of offensive Articuno in Generation 5 NU. With Ice Beam, Hurricane, and HP Grass, it smashed nearly the entire tier. However, it was wholly outclassed by Charizard. Wait a minute, you might think. How can that be? It's an Ice type. It's a completely different kind of Pokemon. Then you realize they are both offensive Pokemon with quadruple Stealth Rock weaknesses in a tier completely starved of hazard removal. If you're going to use a Quad Rocks weak Pokemon, you should use the best one, and in this case, that's Charizard. Now, Articuno isn't bad and it's quite different from Charizard, yet it still remains outclassed in this role because its Quad Rocks weakness is a defining characteristic. Here's another example. In Generation 2 Ubers, Lugia outclasses Suicune. That's even stranger, you think. They don't even share any form of typing. Yes, this is true, and yet Lugia is far better because both it and Suicune are all around walls, and Lugia is the best one there is, boasting several significant advantages over Suicune in better bulk, reliable healing and recover, better speed, and immunities to spikes and earthquake. If you had the choice between Suicune and Lugia for your wall, you'd pick Lugia. That is the easiest way to think about it if a Pokemon outclasses another. If there is one role a single team slot must occupy, and you have the choice between two Pokemon for that team slot, the one you would pick is the one that outclasses the other. It's also between Pokemon that compete with each other for a role. You wouldn't stack Lugia and Suicune on the same team because they largely do the same thing. But of course, it's also important to bear in mind the context. On Generation 5 OU Rain teams, Ferrothorn largely outclasses Skarmory, whereas on Sand teams, Skarmory tends to outclass Ferrothorn. In a vacuum, they don't outclass one another. And if you had to get down to brass tacks, you could say Ferrothorn is better of the two since it fits far better on Sand than Skarm does on Rain. However, that's not as important as the consideration of metagame context. With our video on power creep, that concept might be fresh in your mind, as might be our years of discussing how, as generations went on, older Pokemon lost their viability in light of new Pokemon, buffs, and so on. And it's true, since being outclassed is largely metagame dependent, power creep is a significant contributor to Pokemon being outclassed. For example, Lechonk Machamp lost its OU status when Conkeldurr came around and completely outdid it. It's why you'll often see an outclassed Pokemon drop to a lower tier and then become excellent there, where there isn't that Pokemon that outclassed it previously. Many of the best lower tier Pokemon go on this trajectory multiple times as the game gets stronger and stronger with each new generation. However, the metagame dependent nature of being outclassed is not necessarily restricted to the release of new generations. As strategies develop and shift in viability within an existing metagame, so does the viability of various Pokemon, depending on how they deal with those strategies. We can look to Generation 4 OU as an example. In a vacuum, Starmie isn't outclassed by Latias or vice versa. Their typings are vaguely similar, and they sometimes go for the same team slot, but not necessarily, because their strategies are so different. Starmie with its higher speed, focus on rapid spin and water stab, Latias with different resistances, better bulk, and dragon stab. However, if the metagame favors teams that ignore hazards as opposed to removing them, then bulky Latias tends to be better than bulky Starmie, because it's spikes immune and doesn't have to worry about if hazards are on the field or not. But still, this doesn't necessarily make the entirety of Starmie outclassed. Starmie must simply find a niche Latias cannot effectively do better. Instead of running a bulky set focused on spinning when it is more effective to run bulky Latias and not worry about hazards at all, Starmie can maximize its water stab with a spec set, which provides an entirely separate niche Latias cannot replicate at all. And since the idea of a Pokemon being outclassed must be rooted in as much valid information as possible, it helps for the metagame in question to be established. As such, it's going to be difficult to make such calls in the current metagame at the time of this video, which is early Scarlet and Violet. Yes, there are already clear choices for the most obviously powerful Pokemon in specific roles, like Golden Go. However, in regards to more debatable potential OU Pokemon whose places could be contentious, like Low-Kix or Iron Valiant, the answers aren't yet clear, as the options have just begun to be explored. Pokemon seen as average or bad now could come back and become metagame definers, entirely unique in what they do, as was the case with Kartana and Como-O in Generation 7. Sometimes it's not even a matter of new strategies being developed as much as old ones being forgotten and overlooked in the initial stages of new generations, where the majority of the player base is focused on all the newly added toys. This is especially important to remember, as generation after generation a new Pokemon will seem like it's good until everyone remembers they can use Scarf Tyranitar or Ferrothorn or what have you, and the new Pokemon's viability disappears, revealing it for the UU Pokemon it is more suited as, even if it gets OU hype at the beginning of the generation. The subject of a Pokemon being outclassed is both complex and simple. If you're playing Gen 3 OU, you don't want to use Regice as your special wall instead of Blissey. You'll lose out on instant recovery and natural cure. That's simple. However, that doesn't make the entirety of Regice outclassed. Its offensive sets with Explosion are something Blissey cannot replicate. The nuance of what makes a Pokemon outclassed is interesting, and understanding it leads to better understanding of strategies that are used and why they work, i.e. a better understanding of the game of Pokemon. Plus, with new strategies being developed constantly, a Pokemon's hidden potential might be unleashed at any time. After all, you would think that Pachirisu is outclassed by like every electric type in the game, but look at what Sage and Park did with it by utilizing its unique talents. Understanding what is outclassed and why is critical. After all, to win, you want to use the best strategies, as it's important to not use Flygon over Garchomp just because it has those smaller advantages, when Garchomp is still so much better. However, with understanding comes the critical thinking ability to find that which is potentially overlooked, and with this ability, you will be able to know with greater certainty if this new discovery of yours is outclassed, or if it actually can bring something legitimate and unique to the table. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you like the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about the video? What is a Pokemon that you like but is outclassed by a better Pokemon? Is there anything we missed? Whatever it is, let us know in the comments. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.